But we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexis Gossick. I'm with the Technology Council of Central PA. Thanks so much for carving time out to join us today for our today's tech session with Sage 497 Consulting. And we are joined by Michael Sage this morning to tell us what Sage 497 is up to. Before we hop into things, I want to take a moment to give a shout out to our investor, one of our investors that'll be joining us on today's call, I think is already present. Select Medical, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you represent Select Medical for joining us for this morning's call, you are the reason that we can continue to do great and wonderful programs like these. Following today's session, I will be sending a follow-up email out to everyone that will contain a link to the recording of today's session that'll be posted on TCCP's public website. It'll also contain contact information for Michael, email address, and LinkedIn. So you don't have to worry about scrambling around trying to jot down his information. I'll get it out to you following today's session. I think that's all of the housekeeping items that I have for this morning. So Michael, I'm going to be quiet in a stunning turn of events and turn the floor over to you. Go ahead and take us away.
Great, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's good to see so many faces, and I recognize and some that I don't. So good morning, everybody. I'm just going to share my slides here. Just give me 1 second, and hopefully I got it right in that you're seeing just my slides and not my whole desktop. So, because I had issues earlier, it wanted me to change my permissions. You gotta love technology, right? Even though we're all in technology. Um, so yes, so just as I was shared, so share a little bit about my company here, Sage 497. So we were just established, or I just established Sage 497 earlier this year in March. To be specific, we specialize in delivering expert technology, cybersecurity, and business operational consulting and advisory services to state government, local government in Pennsylvania, education, not-for-profits, and smaller private companies to help them navigate the changing complexities in today's digital world. Have my mission and vision statement there. It's really to be, provide insightful, impactful, reliable, and cost-effective technology, cybersecurity, and operational services to those organizations. I'm gonna try to keep us rolling to get to the things that are most important. So, a little bit about myself. So, as I mentioned, I'm the owner of Sage 497. Just started us up and established the organization in March of this year. Prior to that, I was with the County Commissioners Association, or CCAP, for the last 5.5 years, since 2019. I was serving as their Chief Information Officer and then more recently as their Chief Operations and Information Officer, a combination of their COO and their CIO and Deputy Executive Director for that association, which is a nonprofit that advocates and supports county government in Pennsylvania for all 67 counties. And prior to that, I had spent 15 years with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Started off doing web and application development, moved into system administration, implemented shared services. Then I made the big jump into becoming a chief security officer, or CISO at the time, and then became a deputy CIO, agency IT director, which was equivalent to the CIO for Department of Labor and Industry for a short period of time before becoming the chief technology officer for the Employment Banking and Revenue Delivery Center at the Commonwealth. I jokingly say that if an IT job has the C in the title, I've probably done it. So I've been around the block once or twice. I don't want to admit how old. Somebody recently said the term 2 decades, and it made me feel kind of old. So I'm not going to say that. So on to really what I really want to cover today is the next couple of slides here, which is what is Sage 497 and what do we do? So really what it boils down to is providing strategic leadership services to, again, state and local government, not-for-profits in education, and then smaller for-profit organizations. One of the areas that I'm finding is really popular is leadership support. So serving as a virtual or fractional chief information officer, chief information security officer, or chief operating officer. What a fractional resource, if you're not familiar with that term or virtual one is, it's not a full-time resource. Maybe I'm supporting an organization for 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 days a month instead of a full year. Maybe you're a small organization and you can't afford a full-time CIO, CISO, or COO. But you have operational staff, you have technical staff that are more heads down, technical people doing break fix, things like that. But you need somebody at that strategic level to help guide the organization in those very information operations or cyber. And that's where I would step in and help out, be that fractional resource coming in just a couple hours or days a month to help you lead that. Interim or transitional leadership services. So if you have one of your strategic leaders leaving your organization, um, planned or unplanned, and you need to fill that gap between when they leave and the next person comes in board, that's where I can supply those transitional services. And also help organizations with succession planning. So if you know that's coming and you need somebody to help with succession planning, or if you don't know when the people are leaving and you're just concerned about succession planning, that's where I can come in and help your organization with succession planning. Obviously, strategic planning that goes along with that, both from a technology, cybersecurity, and operational side, but also the entire organization. From a strategic planning side, and road mapping would be more along the lines of budgetary, operational, technology planning, looking at the operational state of your organization and what planned or unplanned activities that you have coming up over the next 3 to 5 years so that you can plan resources um, and budgetarily and financially for those next 3 to 5 years, maybe up to 10 years in some cases, so that you can plan for those activities without stretching your organization or damaging them. Obviously, as I mentioned multiple times, doing things around technology, cybersecurity, and operational, but this time around assessing, bringing in a new fresh set of eyes to your organization to look at your current technology posture, your tech cybersecurity posture, or how your organization operates from an operational perspective. I am not an auditor. I don't pretend to be an auditor. I'm looking at this from industry best practices, common practices, and just looking at it from somebody can come in and maybe ask why you're doing something that you've always done, looking at that from a different perspective. So doing those type of assessments, and what those do is really lead into multiple educational sessions leading up to it, assessment on site, doing questionnaires out to staff, and then producing a findings and recommendations report, which then can be acted upon over the course of years in some cases. Continuous service improvement and service management, whether this be a technology service, a cyber service, or to serve operational services that your organization does internally. It can also be external services, but a lot of times I focus on the internal services of your organization, how you run and operate the internal side of your organization. How are you supplying those services? Are they efficient? Are they need updating? Are they out of date? Are they still meeting the needs of the organization? So looking at those type of services that you supply. Come in and talk to a lot of organizations about risk assessment and management. A lot of organizations don't really consider all risks when we talk about that. That would be, again, technology, cyber, and operational risks. I like to also pull in organization CFOs to talk about financial risks, market risks, and different aspects of that supply chain, um, continuity, and succession risks of your organization. So looking at the risks of your organization and making plans so you can document those so that they're now known and what you're going to either do to mitigate them or manage those risks. So if your organization has never done that, that's something that I can come in and help you with. Extensive background in project and portfolio management and governance management. So if your organization is smaller, this might not be a big problem for you, or maybe it is because you are small, but as your organizations grow or start to expand a project, you're going to run into capacity issues. So how do you manage your resource and demand for those projects? And resources are both, technology resources, budgetary and people resources, along with any other type of areas that you could find. How do you manage those loads? So coming in and help you develop a project portfolio, how to develop a governance process to decide which projects you're going to do when, how you're going to create pipelines. How do you say no? How do you say yes to those types of projects? Again, all those different areas. Again, kind of aligns with some other things I've already talked about. But a lot of times, working with organizations, um, looking at their budgets and trying to plan out how they're going to use and manage their budgets. um, over the next couple. Again, I normally like to go 3 to 5 years out at minimum. How can they hit that OpEx? How can they flatline their budget? Or how can they plan for peaks or valleys in their budget? What are the things that they don't know are coming? How do they plan for the worst case scenario? Um, how do you plan if you have an unexpected shortfall in your budget? So working through those different areas and different aspects, again, a lot of times it's good to bring those outside eyes into looking at something from a new perspective. Policy review and development. Again, a lot of this is focused on government and nonprofit organizations, but I know public sector and private sector both alike have to deal with policies. So are your policies up to date? Are they current? Do you have all the policies that you need? Again, bringing in outside resource to help. That policies are one of those areas that typically falls by the wayside because your resources are focused on doing and not so much on the practices and documentation of those things. So that's where I can come in and help. Mentioned this before, but disaster recovery and continuity and succession planning, are those things documented? Are they known? Where are those single points of failure? When was the last time you looked at those? Do you have the planning in place to know what to do if you had a fire, a flood, or if you had a critical resource, win the lottery and move to Maui, which is my dream, by the way, except for I don't play the lottery. But what would happen if that type of situation happened? What would your organization do if you're big or small? What would happen if you had a fire or a disaster at your main office building? Do you have the ability to relocate staff or send them home and work remotely? Do you have surplus equipment and where is it located? Is it in the same building that you just had the fire? That's a problem. So looking through those processes and making sure they're up to date. And then the last area here is conducting tabletop exercises, bringing in like my individual like myself in to come in and educate your staff on tabletop exercises, doing technology and cybersecurity awareness, and different types of educational and strategic planning, operational efficiencies, shared services, optimizations, reorganizations, change management, whatever it might be in those areas, coming in and educating your staff and your organization on how to lead and manage those practices. And then obviously, any kind of mix thereof of any of these type of things in between. So some of these past things, I've kind of referenced these things. These are just some of the past examples of areas that were, I've done this before, in areas where it's been very successful. So led a number of governmental, both state and local government, tabletop exercises, both from a disaster and cyber perspective. So if you need assistance doing those type of things, doing technology and cyber assessments. Again, I'm not an auditor. I've been through a lot of 3 and 4 letter federal acronym audits, but I'm not an auditor myself. I don't conduct audits. This is looking at an assessment. I don't do pen testing. I don't do testing of your environment. This is looking at your policies, procedures, and posture as a whole and making recommendations on that. So these are more informal, but they do have come out with tangible action items. Looking at strategic planning, done it both from a technology and cyber, but also an organizational wide strategic plan. So if your organization hasn't looked at a strategic plan in a year, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, it's probably time to start doing that. Again, looking at the technology and operational roadmap, looking at where your organization's at now and how does it operate and where does it need to go. What happens if you have a year? How do you plan for a year? Do you know when you're going to when you're going to need a new roof and pave your parking lot, or have your fire suppression system updated, or network server refreshes, network gear, your wireless routers need to replace. If all that stuff hits in one year, that's very bad for a lot of organizations. So how can you do that road mapping and strategic planning around those things? Done a lot of that. A lot of budgetary reviews and optimizations, looking for duplications, waste, overspend, over padding. Um, Again, those areas I just talked about for the road mapping. How can I come in, but that is for the nonprofits, but also state and local government looked at those budgetary reviews and optimizations. Looked at business processes for both government and nonprofits. Again, looking at how does your operations work? How are you delivering services? Are they meeting the needs? How are you mailing? How are you processing paper? How are you cleaning the building? Whatever it might be. Those different areas of looking at those business processes and how can they be optimized to get the most return on your investment and biggest bang. And are there waste? One of the things we sometimes look at, are there waste? Are there processes that made sense 10 years ago, but that are still being done, but don't make sense today. Organizational reviews and reorganizations. Is your organization architected and designed properly? Is it time for a reorganization? Is it time to look at an assessment of your staffing levels? Now, I'm not an HR professional. I've oversaw HR previously, um, but where I have my experience is in reorganizing organizations. I've led two very large scale reorganizations. Um, and over 250 to 300 staff in both cases. And how do you go through reorganization? What does that look like? Now, both of those were from a technology and cyber perspective, but as you work through those processes, how do you get there? Looking at service management, how do you improve your service delivery? Is your service delivery still working? What is the idea of practices around measurements and metrics, helping you build those out? Done that in various levels, both from an IT and cyber and also an operations perspective. And then, as I mentioned, I've done a lot of education and awareness, public speaking, things like this. I go out to organizations. I just did one this week on leading innovation and change. How do you do that within an organization? Done a lot of public speaking about cyber and technology awareness in different areas like that. Done some speaking around organizational assessments and how do you assess your own organization and different things like that. So a lot of those different areas I talked about going out, educating staff on doing those things, but on also working with small teams, but big teams. Some of these things are, with a small group. I talked to a small group once before, about five IT leaders, around what does it mean to do strategic planning? What does it look like? What is the value of it? How do you actually implement a strategic plan? It could be a small group of like 3 to 4 or 5 people. And I've done, educational sessions for a couple hundred people at once. I did an entire security awareness training for an entire county, over 500 staff in over a span of 2 days, coming in and doing that. So, small groups, large groups, doing those type of educations and outreach and awareness. So you may be asking yourself, this all sounds great, but how does this add value, or what is my return on my investment if I would work with Sage 497? So really looking at this as before is really looking at maximizing your investments that you have as an organization today. Looking at reducing duplication and waste. Do you have overlap procurements? Are your procurements, is your technology stack redundant? Are you planning appropriately if your organization is looking to move to the cloud? When should you do it? So you're not wasting an investment in your storage. If you just bought storage, maybe for an example. Um, are you investing in the right technology? Are you investing in the right processes? If it's time for you to, as an organization, to refresh all your printers, that'd be a perfect time to, bring somebody in and do a printer assessment, and review those things. You can reduce your printing capabilities, make it more secure, and reduce your overall lease with those type of products. So looking at you work at organizations, helping them reduce those duplication wastes. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So again, going through those exercises, you may not see that initial investment in a assessment of your cyber posture or your technology posture, or where you're doing those things from a road mapping place. You may not see that instantly. You're not going to see an instant drop in your savings right then and there. But it's when you have a situation happen and you're trying to, where you have a fire or a disaster, minor, major, whatever it is, that you have those plans and processes built out. You're not wasting time, energy, resources, and money figuring that out. So preparation is key. The fractional resources I mentioned earlier on, again, if you're a smaller or medium-sized organization, do you need a full-time CIO? Do you need a full-time COO? If you say, yeah, we need this resource, but to hire them full-time, we're going to spend well over 100,000, maybe 150, 200,000 on that resource. That may not be, even feasible for your organization. Can you bring that in as a fractional resource? Just bringing somebody in for 3 or 4 days a month make more sense, and it's going to save you, but you're going to get the result that you need. Um, Obviously, optimizing your internal processes, you're going to save time. You're going to better and make your investments. You're going to reduce waste. And by doing that, you're going to optimize your staff time, and allow them to operate and do more efficiently across your organization. Budgetary reviews, you see that through savings, investments, planning and forecasting. Are you making sure that you're not having peaks and valleys unexpectedly? And that can be damaging to a budget if you one year you have bloat and the next year you have a famine. That can be very bad for your organization to be going through that type of cycle, um, and especially if it's unplanned or you have a major investment that you're not planning for. Now you have to take a loan out that actually costs you more money. And if you're at a government level, planning for you know grants and what happens after the grant years, or how do you go through an unplanned revenue being cut off from like a federal government level. I previously went through an organization that lost $70 million in funding, federal funding in one year. And how do you plan and react when that happens? And how do you plan for that up front before it even happens? Improved internal and external service delivery and customer satisfaction. I think that kind of speaks for itself. The happier customer you are, different things like that. But talking to an organization recently too about their optimization, they were able to reduce the number of calls to their help desk from 250 one day to 200 in one day, which allowed them to resolve tickets instead of an average ticket being resolved in 3 days, being resolved in 2 days. And their business thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread, because that's the most wonderful thing in the world when their tickets are getting resolved a third faster than they were. So, looking at that type of satisfaction is always good. And organizational focus and looking at the culture through strategic planning and strategic leadership. These are just some of the ways you can really see that return on investment, a better culture of your organization, better communication, more satisfied staff. You're going to see increased retention, better recruitment, and more output from your employees when you do those things. So I'm looking at my time here, getting really close. So I want to be careful here. Just wanted to share some insights. Organizations have a hard time leading change internally. They need that assistance. They need those fresh eyes. They need that fresh voice coming in from the outside. If it's your internal person talking, they're used to always saying, "Oh, I always hear from Mike. I always hear from Susie. I always hear from Paul." If you hear from somebody different and new, a new face in front of the room, a lot of times it hits differently. Um, they'll look at things a little bit different, a different perspective. Small organizations need strategic leadership support. There are a lot of small organizations get stuck in what they've always done because it works, not because it is most efficient. And they're trying to maybe branch out and do more and different things, but they're so stuck in what they're doing, they can't take the time for the strategic planning and leadership. And that's where we would come in. Policies, DR, COOP, and these other things often become overlooked because they're not part of the everyday practices. Um, they're not something they have to lean on every single day, but if they're not there when they need them, that's a real problem. Leading and implementing change is difficult. Somebody that has been there and done that before can coach you through that is key. Um, Strategic planning is essential for long-term implementation of plans and strategies. If you don't plan for 3 to 5 years out, you're going to find yourself in 3 to 5 years doing exactly what you're doing today. And so people being able to lead that is one thing, but then I think the implementation of those plans, they get it, they do it, and they stick it on the shelf and they forget about it for 3 to 5 years. So getting somebody in that can tell them how to implement, how to develop goals that are SMART. Have you ever heard that acronym SMART? How can they do that? And then how do they implement strategies where it's part of everyday life in the organization? Everything circles back to it. That's where I come in and help out organizations. Communications, education, and awareness is key. If you're not communicating, educating, and making your staff aware of what's going on, things are going to fail. Or you're going to have disgruntledness and you're going to have turnover problems and retention problems. Internal and external collaboration is key. We're not in this alone, which leverage those outside resources when you can. And optimization and automation are not bad words. You hear that a lot, and people think they're buzzwords. Optimization is obviously honestly one of my favorite words. I got reminded recently by somebody recently, and they said, "Hey, don't forget about maximization." I said, "Absolutely." Optimizing, maximizing, and automations are key to any organization. If you're not embracing these mindsets, you're falling behind. And lastly, I'm very passionate bringing that personally, but also then to Sage 497 and outreach and collaboration. I try to put out insight articles, is what I call them, little educational articles every couple of weeks on different topics. I'm very passionate about intergovernment and cross-sector collaboration. I did that for years. Working with counties and state and counties and the IUs and municipalities and all those entities, but then bringing in the vendor community, bringing in public sector and private sector together to work together to solve problems. So I'm a big fan of that. I continue to do that. I'm working with, Berks County Alliance, trying to help them do that from a cyber perspective. Obviously being part of this group, TCCP is a great area of doing that. I love get out in public speaking, getting out and talking to as many people as I can, doing educational awareness engagements. I love doing that stuff. I get passionate about it, and love talking about strategic partnerships. I don't try to pretend that I'm the only person that can do these things. So I try to form these groups with managed service providers, resellers, and things like that that I know are trusted and that are good. And then, in those areas too, a lot of those organizations, if you have managed services, you probably need a strategic leadership. So I will end on how can you engage with me? Getting a cue here that I got to wrap up here in a minute. So this is how you can engage with me. I do direct services through contracts, staff augmentation, subcontracting work, strategic partnerships, as I mentioned, but there's my contact information there too. So I'm going to stop here and just open it up and turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Michael. I admittedly, when you said, a staff member winning the lottery and moving to Maui, my mind is running as it's raining in Central PA. Not that I have any plans, but I also wouldn't turn it down. Thanks very much for the session this morning. We do have a couple of minutes. I'm going to be quiet for a moment and see if anybody on the call has any questions, or would like to provide any feedback to Michael while we have his here today, gone to Maui. Yes, yes. Very nice. Any questions, any feedback for Michael before we wrap up today's session? Again, I will get a follow-up email out to everyone with Michael's contact information and a link to the session recording. But any questions? Let me be quiet for a minute. Michael, when there's no questions or no feedback, it means one of two things. Either you missed the mark entirely or you did a really, really great job. And I'm leaning towards the you did a really, really great job. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you to everybody who dialed in this morning to join us. Hopefully, we're going to see some peaks of sunshine later today. So I hope you can take advantage of that. Thanks for attending. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day today.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Alexis.